The idea of documenting the post-independence Indian architecture is what induced the foray of the vanguards of Indian architecture. Past 70 years have seen four major eras from the grapple for survival as an independent nation to quest for recognition of Indian architectural fraternity and their credo across India. The four chapters of Quadrants are framed across the four quantum leaps along these years. The speakers of chapter 1 took us through the factual journey of the architecture of the independence. The chapter 2 of Quadrants was focused on the era 1960 to 1980 through insightful talks on Indian architecture, Betwixt policies. It was about realizing the need for involvement of architectural fraternity in policy making through research and training. Moving further ahead in this journey, with the world realizing the importance of sustainability after the Earth Summit, the term sustainable took several dimensions. The expanse of its usage in Indian architecture is immeasurable. Chapter 3 of Quadrants 2021 is an attempt to realize its practical implementation in the western and southern parts of India. That's a brief introduction of the Quadrants 1, 2, and the third one which we are having today.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for briefing us on the chapter 3 and the essence of Quadrants. We now request you to please introduce our chief guest, Dr. Amok Kumar Gupta, and please invite him to inaugurate the chapter.
Yeah, well, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Amok Kumar Gupta to this platform today. Architect Amok Kumar Gupta is a practicing architect and valuer. Having done his graduation course of BArch and subsequent post-graduation course of urban development from the Maulana Azad College of Technology, Bhopal, in the years 85 and 2001 respectively. He completed his doctoral research in the domain of traditional Indian knowledge systems in architecture. His fields of specialization include both individual and group housing projects and various urban schemes. He has gained extensive professional experience in these fields for over 35 years while actively engaging in both government and private sectors. His professional experiences range across a myriad of government and private construction, as well as developmental projects. Some of the notable among which are large-scale projects being run by the government of Madhya Pradesh, group housing schemes for Bhopal Development Authority, Sterling Builders and Contractors, Rashtriya Group New Delhi, Urban ANNURM, sports center, and several large-scale hospital buildings across India. Additionally, he has also been actively involved in several prominent government as well as professional committees for several prominent towns of Madhya Pradesh, Building Bylaws Committee, Review Committee for Western Zone, various expert committees comprised by the Council of Architecture. Having a strong inclination and flair for the academia, he has previously been associated with many educational bodies and has been an active member of the Board of Governors of several institutes of national acclaim and importance like Maulana Azad National Technology Bhopal, School of Planning and Architecture Bhopal, Samrat Ashok Technology Institute Vidisha. He is currently serving as the chairman of the Board of Governors for the School of Planning and Architecture New Delhi, an institute of national importance. A very warm welcome to you, sir, once again.
Thank you. आज COA TRC भोपाल, काउंसिल ऑफ आर्किटेक्चर और BMS कॉलेज के संयुक्त तत्वाधान में जो कार्यक्रम चल रहा है, इसमें आपने मुझे बुलाया कुछ बोलने अवसर दिया उसके लिए धन्यवाद। संक्षेप में अगर मैं इसको इस प्रकार से देखूं कि कुछ वर्ष पूर्व भारत माननीय प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के निर्देशन में मेक इन इंडिया की बात कर रहा था, फिर मेड इन इंडिया की बात किया, फिर स्टार्टअप की बात किया, और अब हम आत्मनिर्भर भारत की बात कर रहे हैं। आत्मनिर्भर भारत जब ही होगा जब हम हर क्षेत्र में आत्मनिर्भर होंगे। उस विषय पर आने से पहले मैं एक संक्षिप्त में COA TRC भोपाल की धन्यवाद देना चाहूंगा कि उन्होंने 2 साल के अंदर में बहुत सारे कार्यक्रम किए और उसका प्रभाव सुदूर क्षेत्रों में देखने को मिला। इसमें भागीदारी काफी अच्छी संख्या में हुई, जिसमें एकेडमिक्स से जुड़े हुए लोग भी थे, विद्यार्थी भी थे और प्रैक्टिसिंग आर्किटेक्ट्स भी थे। तो नई शिक्षा नीति, अभी मुझे विश्वास है आप सब लोग जो एकेडमिक्स से जुड़े हुए हैं, अगर नई शिक्षा नीति के क्लॉज 18 से 20 देखें तो वह भी बात करता है आत्मनिर्भरता की। और आत्मनिर्भरता की जब बात करता है तो वो कहता है शिक्षा सबसे पहले स्थानीय भाषा में, लोकल लैंग्वेज। और हमारे यहाँ भारत में अभी तक, चाहे पूर्व पश्चिम उत्तर दक्षिण कहीं पर भी हो, शिक्षा का स्थानीय माध्यम कम होते चला जा रहा है। सिमिलरली जब हम इसको वास्तुकला, आर्किटेक्चर एंड प्लानिंग के दृष्टिकोण से देखें तो बात होती है, हम हमेशा बात करेंगे लोकल, वोकल, ग्लोबल, लेकिन कॉन्फ्रेंस का विषय लोकल होता है, बाकी आउटपुट मुझे कोई लोकल दिखता नहीं। वी टॉक अबाउट लोकल मटेरियल, वी टॉक अबाउट लोकल क्राफ्ट्समैनशिप, लोकल आर्किटेक्चर, बट जब हम सब डिजाइन करने बैठते हैं तो या तो स्वयं के द्वारा या क्लाइंट के द्वारा प्रेशराइज होते हैं और हम ग्लोबल डिजाइन बनाने लगते हैं। तो हमें आवश्यकता इस बात की है कि हम यह देखें कि हम ग्लोबल, हम बने, हमारा ज्ञान ग्लोबल बने। ऐसा नहीं कि सारे ग्लोबल चीज को हम अपने में समेट लें, बिकॉज आर्किटेक्चर इज ऑलवेज अ फील्ड जो रूट्स के साथ जुड़ी रहती है। आपने ये 4 क्वाड्रेंट्स का विषय रखा तो शुरू में गलतफहमी होती है कि भारत को 4 हिस्से में बांट के बात कर रहे हैं, ऐसा नहीं है। हम स्वतंत्रता के बाद, आज आप सब लोगों को पता है कि 75 वर्ष स्वतंत्रता के आने वाले हैं, और उसके पूर्व पृष्ठभूमि में हम ये सब आयोजन कर रहे हैं ताकि हम इस बात का भी आकलन कर सकें कि क्या हम वास्तव में स्वतंत्र हुए हैं। आपके इस विषय में चैप्टर 2 जो था उसमें आपने एक वर्ड यूज किया, आर्किटेक्चर ऑफ द इंडिपेंडेंट्स, और उसका हिंदी लिखा आजाद भारतीयों की वास्तुकला। मुझे नहीं मालूम इस विषय पर क्या चर्चा हुई होगी, लेकिन कोई शब्द जब शब्द के रूप में प्रयोग में आए और अगर लर्नेड पर्सन उस शब्द को ले रहा है तो बातचीत की दिशा उसी पे मुड़ जाती है। मेरे विचार में आजाद से ज्यादा अच्छा शब्द होता स्वतंत्र, क्योंकि आज हमें अगर आत्मनिर्भर बनना है तो हमें अपना तंत्र चाहिए। आज हिंदुस्तान में हमारे रूलर बदल गए, सिलेक्शन प्रोसेस ऑफ रूलर बदल गया, लेकिन तंत्र मेरा वही पुराना है। तो ये हम सबको विचार करना होगा कि क्या हम वास्तव में स्वतंत्र हुए हैं, और स्वतंत्र नहीं हुए हैं तो उसके लिए हमें क्या करना है। कॉलोनाइजिंग एंड डीकोलोनाइजिंग, डीकोलोनाइजिंग की बात तो शुरू हो गई है, बट उसके पहले डीकोलोनाइजेशन ऑफ माइंड की जरूरत है। मैं एक छोटा सा उदाहरण दूंगा। अंग्रेज आए, उन्होंने हिंदुस्तान में बहुत अच्छी अच्छी बिल्डिंग बनाई, बहुत अच्छी अच्छी बिल्डिंग बनाई, चाहे वो बंगाल में हो, मद्रास प्रेसिडेंसी में हो, या दिल्ली में। आप उनके द्वारा बनाए बिल्डिंगों को यूरोप या लंदन की बिल्डिंगों से कंपेयर करके देखिए, क्या फर्क है। उन्होंने जो बिल्डिंग बनाई वो भारत में भारत के उपलब्ध सामग्री और भारत के क्लाइमेटोलॉजिकल कंडीशन के हिसाब से सोच के बनाई। आप किसी भी पुराने सर्किट हाउस चल जाइए, you will find a wide corridor, a veranda, whereas this element misses in normal European countries or in UK. तो उन्होंने कितना दिमाग से काम किया, उसी बिल्डिंग को इंडियन क्लाइमेट के कंडीशन के हिसाब से कैसे बना सकते हैं, बनाया। लेकिन आज हम क्या कर रहे हैं, आज हम अपनी सारी बिल्डिंग को यूरोपियन स्टाइल में बना रहे हैं। क्यों बना रहे हैं? शायद इसलिए कि हमारे मन का डीकोलोनाइजेशन ऑफ माइंड नहीं हुआ। हिस्ट्री ऑफ आर्किटेक्चर नामक सब्जेक्ट में हमें इंडियन आर्किटेक्चर के बारे में बहुत संक्षिप्त सी चीज बताई जाती है, पढ़ाई जाती है, और इसी का कारण है कि हमारे स्टूडेंट्स कॉलम की बात पूछो तो वो गोथिक कॉलम, मैनिक कॉलम की बात करने लगेंगे, लेकिन भारतीय कॉलम के बारे में उनको जरा भी ज्ञान नहीं। और इस चीज को लाने के लिए हमें अपने कैरिकुलम में भी आवश्यकता अनुसार बदलाव करना पड़ेगा। आपने इस 4 अलग अलग सत्र में अलग अलग विषय लिया, और वास्तव में अगर आत्मनिर्भर भारत की बात कर रहे हैं तो हमें इस पर भी विचार करना पड़ेगा कि इन सबका समावेश करते हुए, जैसे आज चैप्टर 3 है, चैप्टर 3 में हम बात कर रहे हैं एगुलिनेटिंग। कुछ इसको ग्लू से जोड़ने वाला बताते हैं, कुछ उत्तेजित या उत्प्रेरित करने वाला बताते हैं। डेफिनेटली वास्तुकला सतत विकास का सम्मिश्रण है, लेकिन वास्तुकला हमेशा जमीन से जुड़ी हुई है। हम पहले के 3 चैप्टर को पूरा अच्छे से समझ लेंगे तो निश्चित तौर पे हमारा अगला चैप्टर विच टॉक्स अबाउट ग्लोबलाइजेशन टू इंक्लूसिवनेस, ये महत्वपूर्ण सत्र होगा और समापन सत्र होगा। जब हम इंक्लूसिवनेस की बात करेंगे तो इट शुड बी इंक्लूसिवनेस ऑफ ऑल द कंसल्टेंट एंड ऑल द मटेरियल्स, बट इसके मूल में सेंटर में एक चीज होगी which is best fit available locally. You'll have to be vocal for local and then global. You are not going to make a factory which is using the global material here. मुझे पूर्ण विश्वास है कि इस चौथे सत्र के बाद COA भोपाल, जो डॉक्टर नवनीत मुर्मू उसको कोऑर्डिनेट करते हैं, और BMS कॉलेज सूर्य पांडे जी और प्राचार्य महोदया इसके ऊपर एक पॉलिसी पेपर लेके आएंगे नटशेल में, बिकॉज मैंने देखा इसमें नंबर ऑफ पार्टिसिपेंट्स बहुत अच्छे हुए हैं और बहुत सारे हुए, सो दैट वी कैन थिंक टू स्टार्ट revisiting our curriculum to make the dream true, that is of आत्मनिर्भर भारत। आप सब लोगों ने मुझे सुना, अवसर दिया, इसके लिए धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद सर, थैंक यू। आपने बहुत अच्छे से इस थीम को समझाया। वी आर वेरी थैंकफुल टू यू फॉर अंडरस्टैंडिंग एंड अप्रिशिएटिंग आवर थीम, and we will definitely welcome all your suggestions It has given us a motivation to move ahead. Mamta ma'am, would you like to say something on that, or shall we proceed? Ma'am, you're on mute. Yeah.
I think, Shubhra, you have put it across pretty well, and I second that. And thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for such an excellent introduction and kind of making us understand more about it, and to the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. We will now move ahead with our presentations today, and we'll now welcome our speakers for the day. As mentioned earlier by our director, ma'am, the first speaker today is from the western part. It's someone who has worked enormously on the western part of India and can take us through the journey of sustainability in those parts. Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev is Dean of Sushant School of Art and Architecture and Director, Architecture, Planning and Design Schools of Sushant University. She qualified as an architect in 1989 from SPA Delhi and completed her PhD in 1996 from the University of London and has worked as a conservation consultant, writer and a designer. She has taught at the University of Sussex and written 4 books and several articles on the subjects of Jaipur, traditional knowledge systems, Indian cities and Indian modernities. She has worked and written extensively on the city of Jaipur, focusing on its planning, architecture, and crafts traditions. Since publishing these books, Dr. Sachdev has been focusing on its planning, architecture, and craft traditions. She's been a consultant for restoration of Jal Mahal in Jaipur, was the design curator for the artwork of its pavilions, and the co-curator for exhibition of the painted pleasures. Her latest book is on the festivals of the Jaipur court. At Sushant University, she has introduced several new programs, various reforms and innovations in teaching and learning systems, not just in the fields of architecture, but planning, design at both undergraduate, postgraduate, as well as doctoral levels. Several outreach programs has forged new relationships with urban authorities and communities and are bearing fruits and continue to strengthen the brand of school and the university. She is currently working on diversing an integrated approach of learning and developing a research ecosystem for the creative fields of architecture, planning and design. We welcome you, ma'am. We are really blessed and really happy to have you here because the crux of agglutinating sustainability and architecture in Indian context can be very well delivered by you. Can we please start with your presentation, ma'am? Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhra, for that introduction. I'm going to switch on my presentation soon, and but just to address my role in this Quadrants, I completed my PhD, as you've just read out, in '96 on Vastu Vidya, and that is my core expertise. My PhD study of 3 years, and I was on a Felix scholarship, so it was a very comfortable scholarship, and it allowed me, a long period to go through all the texts and read them very, very closely to understand what this was about. It stemmed from, my grandfather, after I was nearly completing my architecture, who used to tease me that I'm hardly an architect if I didn't know all these ancient texts that are there in this country, and he was right, because we were not taught any of this in the school or any school. After studying and internalizing the theory, and of course, when you study, our traditions are such that, any tradition is such that you can't study anything, any tradition in isolation of the allied fields, so that if you want to study, Vastu Shastra, you have to know astrology, you have to know, you have to know what Natya Shastra is about, what Art Shastra is about. So you have to kind of engage with all the, because architecture is a multidisciplinary field. So you have to engage with all the disciplines that contribute to this knowledge system. And having internalized and worked on the theory, the next obvious question was, so how do I learn? How do I understand how this theory was applied? And to understand how it was applied, I had to move to a canvas that was not before the British came in, because as you may have discussed in the previous quadrants, that there is a very visible chasm between traditional and modern practices, and the modern architectural practice and institutions are very much framed from within the 20th century modern world, which includes, in our case, colonization. So I had to move to a world which was untouched by this. So and also not very far away from where we are. So Jaipur was a perfect case for me to then understand, how Vastuvidya was applied in constructing and realizing, and what was this world about, and what was the patron like, how did the city come about, what were the ideas of, as you say, sustainability, of urbanity that were pushed by the patron. And Jaipur is a very interesting case in many ways, because it was designed as a single process. So, in the case of Udaipur or Jodhpur, you've got several layers of construction. So it's very difficult to sort of unlayer it and to understand what the process is, because I was, trying to look at the design process. And also, so I had to look at a city which was designed in a single process, which was pre-modern, and also I was also looking for a city that had, modern agendas, in the sense that it wasn't a temple city. Jaipur city was designed as a commercial city. It was designed as the best place to shop in. So it's almost like how we design cities today, and we commercial success mattered a great deal to its patrons. So it has a lot of lessons for us to learn from Jaipur, because in many ways I feel that was the point of modernism for us. 18th century was when our modernization started. Modernization, what is modernization? Modernization is also what happened in internationalism as well, but there was a big wave of standardization of time and space. How you measure time and space are the two factors that contribute to any kind of civilizational structuring. Measurement of time and space. Time and space are both parameters or attributes that are inherently immeasurable, and we as a society agree a system by which we measure it. And what Jay Singh, now I'm going to just put my presentation on and take you through the journey of the ruler and of the city, and show you what. So I hope it works. No? Did it happen?
No, no ma'am. You have to minimize the screen, ma'am, and your screen was shown, your screen was visible, but you just have to minimize the screen, right. The meeting screen.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yeah. Okay. So I take you through a journey of Sawai Jai Singh. Here he is in all his, grandeur clothes, and also, towards the end of his life, he's already established Jaipur by now. As you can see, he's aging, he's graying. He's very elegantly standing with a walking stick. He came quite early on the throne. This Jaipur was established in 1727, and this portrait is, much later. But why I'm showing you this is, look at the clothes he's wearing. He's wearing, very fine muslin overcoat, and under which is another, very full jama with his trousers as well, and shoes matching his turban. So and jewelry as well. So they were, we lived in a world which was acutely, as today, sensitive to fashion, to style, to image, to courtly elegance. And this is where he belonged to. This is where he was born. He was born in Amer, and Amer Fort is a very kind of guarded, nestled structure. It's defensive architecture. So it's surrounded by hills. It's very difficult to attack it, and the way to it is also very arduous and difficult. Man Singh, who also lived here, his ancestor, was a friend of Akbar. So it has old roots, and Jai Singh was born here in a very kind of sheltered surroundings environment. And 18th century is also, do remember that 18th century was also when the Mughal power was waning. It was not at its strongest. Aurangzeb was on the throne. So it was, this was the time that, Jai Singh took the strategic decision and a brave one, to come down to the plains, to descend on the plains and establish a city. And as in any kind of city, building a city is a very kind of politically important step for any society, any culture, any, political entity, to kind of say, to build a new city's announcement of its confidence, of its arrival, of its, of its presence. So Savai Jai Singh II was born here, and he decides to build a city named after him, Jaipur. And this is just a a picture from the fort, looking down on the lake. This is just to show you, the beautiful garden that the fort overlooks, and it's almost like carpet, and you can see how the the Mughal Jali pattern is used as a flower bed pattern, and how, in its heyday, each of these flower beds had different color flowers, so it almost looked like a woven carpet from above. And this is just to show the kind of acutely sensitive and aesthetically fine sensibility that was exercised in designing the surroundings, designing what one saw, and the views were always very important in architecture, as they still are. View is not just a window. It's not a view is also, what a window gives you is an opening for your own mind. And, we have experienced this as today also, whenever you want to reflect on or think about something, you move towards a window and look out. And it, in a way, kind of opens your mind. And that's the importance of views that we've always had for architecture. Architecture is as much inwards as it is outwards. This is Jal Mahal, which I was also involved in restoring with the craftsmen, and Jal Mahal was on the way to Jaipur from Amer. So when you come down from Amer and you're going towards Jaipur, this falls on the way, and this Jai Singh used almost as a site office, because it was on the way to Jaipur, which was getting built. And this is like a pleasure pavilion. It is built around an outcrop. It's not a very deep building. It's an outcrop, and the lake is dug out, and it's surrounded by hills and water, and it's got a rooftop garden, which we very lovingly restored. Regarding space and time, what actually establishes a city is a sense of order. It's sense of order in terms of, the presence of a higher, order. And what Jai Singh also did was, he brought in to be at the heart of the city, Govind Dev Ji. Govind Dev was housed in a temple in Vrindavan, in Govind Dev Temple, which was during Aurangzeb's time, partially attacked, and Govind Dev Ji was moved from Vrindavan to Kanak Vrindavan, which is near Amer, to a garden, garden temple. And the central deity is, Govind Dev Ji, who now presides, is at the heart of Jaipur city. So at the heart of Jaipur city is Govind Dev Ji, and then Radha followed him, and you see Radha on his left, and then the Sakhi on his right. And this is a kind of a life-size, large collage that is there in the City Palace in Jaipur. And when I was doing my research, this was just lying down, it was on the floor rolled up. And, as I opened it, it was kind of this magnificent, huge collage, and jaw-droppingly beautiful. It had, it uses gold foil and very, very fine painting. The point I'm trying to make is that, we often associate Indian art with miniature paintings, with small paintings, but, Jaipur had this tradition of large paintings. The Jai Singh portrait that I showed you as my opening slide is a life-size portrait of Jai Singh. It's not a small, but of course inspired by the miniature painting in the level of detail that it houses. But you can see this is, a picture, almost a picture of Govind Dev Temple, and Govind Dev Temple also has, Govind Dev Ji in the center, and then Radha and the two Sakhis, and you see the little Gopal and the Ammonites that are, the Swayambhu, black Ammonites representing gods. So, and this is where he was housed, and you can see. So Jaipur was, the site of Jaipur was a land. It was a jungle. It was, it had this hunting lodge in the center of the site. So what Jai Singh does is he brings Govind Dev Ji and houses him here. In the heart of the city, and you can see that this is not a temple building. It is a hunting lodge, and you can see the water spouts that are in the shape of a bull, and this is a pavilion. So also to show that typologies are as diverse as the number of buildings that we have in India. It is, of course, we find standard, Dravida, Nagara, Vesara type of temples, but also, in between, there are thousands of typologies of temples that are, Haveli temples. There are temples like these, temples that have unusual forms that just speak of the diversity of expression that we have in this country. And so Govind Dev Ji is housed in the city. So he's the first resident, and he's still today regarded as the first resident of the city. And you can see by the number of students who queue up before their exams to Govind Dev Ji seeking his blessings. And I'm sure he's very generous with his blessings. And he is, if you want to start a new work, people would go to the first resident of Jaipur and seek his blessings. This is very common of Indian cities to have that. The other sacred, so to speak, divinity or divine power that has a very strong presence in Jaipur is Gauri. And Gauri, this is goddess Gauri, and she lives in the Zanana. And she takes a round of the city twice a year during spring Navratri and the winter Navratri. And this is during Tej, of course, because you can see the balconies. Her palki is covered, so as if anticipating rain. And Gauri takes a round of the city and is offered prasad, and then she goes back during Tej to the Zanana. We are also talking about 18th century. We are talking about pre-modern India, and this is, our architectural processes never used drawing. Drawings were introduced by the British as a contractual interface between the people who were designing and the people who were going to execute, because it's they were not speaking the same language. And Vastu Shastra, Vastu Vidya is a highly codified form of language where you negotiate design in terms of words, so that if you were to commission a portrait or say a haveli, you would go to the site with a master craftsman and say, I want to do chowk ki haveli or teen chowk ki haveli, and from that mandate will come out all the proportions, because the horizontal and the verticals are tied up, and the whole matrix of the proportional system would be negotiated in words. It's like how with the sabzi wala, sometimes you can negotiate a recipe. So you can say that I want to make this, so what should I put, and then you've already through simple verbal exchanges, you have designed a meal. It's like that. So we've had all sophisticated civilizations in the world have a very strong and highly evolved codified system of design, which does not rest on drawings and the idea of accuracy and the idea of contractual agreements. And these were, of course, contractual agreements, but we didn't have kind of this drawing process. That's I think a topic for another lecture. But what I'm showing you here is what we do have are these work in progress drawings, which are in the City Palace, this is and you can see the Govindev temple. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is where the temple is. This is Badal Mahal. This is Nahargarh, and this is Jal Mahal. And these are all the chowkeries, the Choti Chopper, Bari Chopper, and this is the road that stretches from Agra and goes to Agra and Ajmer. And you can see, so these drawings have a lot of information, and these, like miniature paintings have. In miniature paintings also, you must notice that, to a modern mind, that is a wrong perspective. But the thing is that it uses a sort of a multi-perspective to show as much information as possible, so that at once you can see what is outside, what is inside the room, you can see what is behind the house in one drawing. And that was kind of communication, and layering of information was, of course, the key agenda. And this is a later drawing of Jaipur, and you can see the mohallas and the choppers and the principal streets. So my process was to reconstruct from the theory that I had studied for over 3 years as PhD, but before that I had relearned Sanskrit and engaged with the texts, to kind of reconstruct the process of design of from theory to what Jaipur is. So I looked at the mandala, of course, and there were lots of there were lots of guidelines that a city with seven, a pura is one that has 7 gates, one that has, principal streets that are perpendicular to each other, a central open space. And this is the sort of the concept that was beginning to emerge from various readings of Vastu Shastra texts. So on the top right is the site of Jaipur. So, I looked at the site of Jaipur without any building as Jai Singh had found it. And this is the site of Jaipur, and this is the hunting lodge that was pre-existing on the site. And then we had the principal road going here. Now, this principal road that leads to Agra and Ajmer is the Mughal Highway. This is where most of the revenue is collected. This is the road that the Mughals used to go to their pilgrim sites, two very, very important Mughal sites of Agra and Ajmer. And then you have a road that goes to Delhi, which is this one, which is another very important road which cut across the site. So in a sense, and then you've got these hills. You've got Nahargarh on the top left, and in the southeast, you've got a hill with a Surya temple in the middle. This is the Surya Mandir. And then you've got this lake. And so basically, the 2 principal axes of the site are already present. One is that one cannot cross the Mughal Highway because the land did not belong to him. The land ended with this highway, and the other one was the important use of the road that went through the site. So obviously, when you have a site, and Jai Singh had decided this to be a commercial city, this to be commercially lucrative city. So obviously what you decide, when there is a road with already existing traffic, there's already a footfall, you move it through your site. And then, what do you do with the site road? You put the most important bazaar on that road. So he placed Jawhari Bazaar on this road. And Jawhari Bazaar, as you know, is a street, is a road where you can buy the finest jewelry, and trading of jewelry is a big commercial success. I mean, very valuable for the commercial success of Jaipur. So and then what you also get from these principal streets is one corner of the mandala. So you get the grid size. And then you start building the grid, and in the center you have to have the hunting lodge, and Govind Dev Ji is already there, and then you push the grid till you hit Nahargarh, so that you can use it as a defense, so that you get security of the hill in the northwest. And then in the southeast, because it's already a hill, you extend, you get one more corner and nudge it towards the southeast to plug this gap, which can be a weak point for your city. And so you get this very long facade abutting the Mughal Highway. So when you're actually approaching Jaipur and you go to Sanganeri Gate and Ajmeri Gate, and you see that Jaipur is so huge, so long, but actually it's not very deep. It's not a very huge city. The facade is very, very long. And you can see in the bottom right diagram that you've got the central Govind Dev temple, and then in the central square, of course, also is the palace, is the king's palace. And you've got the road that cuts across, goes north to Delhi, which is then the Jawhari Bazaar, and then you've got the choppers, and so you see the form emerging of the entire city. And this is Jawhari Bazaar And the material Jai Singh uses very cleverly, because this was designed as a, it was built in 14 years flat, and a rapid city. It was designed quickly, and he was helped by Vidyadhar Bhattacharya, who was a diwan. He was a planner, and so this was designed using using the color palette of the authority. Bear in mind, the Mughals, the great builders. Akbar was a great builder who built, Fatehpur Sikri, and then Shah Jahan after him built a lot in marble. Akbar used red sandstone. So, and what Jai Singh very cleverly does is he projects the idea of red sandstone, but it is not red sandstone. It is rubble masonry, lime plaster, and geru. Geru is the brick powder. It's terracotta. Terracotta means cooked earth. Terra is earth, cotta is cooked. And this is what he uses for all the buildings that face the streets. So there is, all the public spaces are in this color. So you get this impression of red sandstone, but it is not red sandstone. And it continues to fool us, and it continues to tell us that it might be pink, which is another story of how it got pink from Geru. But this is an old photograph of Jaipur while it was getting constructed. In, this is in 19th century photograph. Of course, camera was invented in 1850, so it is of that time. And you can see, the gateway and the road, principal road that is stretching across towards the hills, and the growth of the mohallas, and you can see the boundary walls being erected for the development. And this is during one of the visits by the emperor, British emperor, who visited India and of course Jaipur, and this welcome was printed on one of the hills in Bollywood style. But you can see the Hawa Mahal and the choppers were actually step wells. So this photograph, shows you, firstly, of course, there was no automobile, which is such a killer for, cities like this, which were designed to be pedestrian cities, and all the kind of the choppers were step wells where you could get fresh water. There would be kiosks around it, and it had, what is now very fashionably known as mixed land use. It was also sort of the land use was occupation based. So all the the crafts, similar crafts, were clustered in a mohalla. Now, clustering of similar occupations or crafts means that the people will use the resources together. They will share the resources that it takes to develop, to make, say, leather craft or weaving or spices or whatever, and it also means that you share the footfall. So the customer who's going to say Khajane Walo Ka Rasta, where you get marble carvers, obviously that person is not there to buy spices. He's obviously there to buy marble. So you already have a converted customer, which means that it raises a competition among the people who are selling their wares in that street that sells similar stuff. And this is again a photograph just showing you the fantastically vibrant life that the city has even today. It just kind of has a lot of resonance now during lockdown, of course, because one misses going out and being in those spaces. But in this photograph, there's a royal procession going on, on Sirideori Bazaar, on the street, And there are people on the chat, on the veranda, in every open space, public spaces, all out, coming out to see, catch a glimpse of the king, catch a glimpse of royalty, and see what they're wearing, see what music is being played. And this sort of, these processions and festivals, they bind the city. They become the what Dr. Amog was saying, the agglutinating factor of the fabric of the city. So, whether it's Tej or Holi or Diwali, or, everybody kind of is, celebrating that. And there is a collective celebration that, in a way, raises the consciousness of the entire city. And it's a fantastic, I mean, most of us have experienced that at some point or another in our lives, to be in a city during a festival, and and everybody is in it, and it's an amazing experience. And this is the palace area next to the hills and Chandra Mahal. And you can see the compactness of the form, the courtyards. Of course, Jaipur is hot and arid, so you've got a lot of shared spaces, a lot of shaded spaces, and compact in its density. This slide shows you very clearly what was the relationship of the patron with the god, with Govind Dev Ji. So this picture is from Chandra Mahal, looking towards Galtaji, which is the hill which has this Surya temple on top. And of course, one can go around with a compass checking where this is true east, but of course it's not. It's 20 degrees of east, but it is east because Surya is there. So nobody kind of says, "Arey, ye to exact east nahi," but that doesn't matter. It's your positioning of and marking of directions that is so clearly visible here. That you've got Govind Dev Ji, and you've got Galta Surya temple, and the king, the palace, in the same axis. And this is Chandra Mahal, and that picture was taken from near the flag, looking towards Govind Dev temple. And you can see the color scheme of the royal bit, the royal bit inside the palace, and there's a clear difference. So the public spaces were used. They used geru, and the interior spaces used khamira. Khamira is fermented lime. So when you soak lime, it breaks down, and the more you soak, the finer it gets, and it releases heat, and it gets into this fine paste. And khamira, in khamira, you also add jaggery and methi, which makes it, insect proof. And it gives it this very creamy color. It's not totally white, it's off-white. And this is, and it resembles marble. So you will remember how in Delhi Red Fort, this hierarchy of materials is used. You've got the Diwani arm, which is all red sandstone. And as you go inside Diwani Khas and Rang Mahal, it gets more and more white because, white marble is more expensive, of course, than red sandstone. And there is the biggest mine of white marble is in Makrana, which is in Rajasthan. So that's the biggest source of good marble, white marble you have in the country. But this does not use, it uses khamira to kind of invoke white marble, and it's not expensive. And this shows you very clearly what the kind of the old spaces, the public spaces and the private private spaces like. So this is Sarvatobhadra on the right, which is which is like a Diwane Khas of where Jai Singh would sit and have meetings with his officials, and at the back off white is the royal residence. So you can see the color difference as you go inside the royal bit. It gets white, and this is a straight shot of Sarvatobhadra. Sarvatobhadra means open on all sides. Sarvatobhadra means window or opening. And this is a very, very almost perfect building, a square building with, Tibari, 3 arches on all its 4 sides with the corners closed. And, this is what it was earlier covered in, a red floor. Now it has marble. And this is the outer gate of the. This is the gate towards the palace, and I'm just showing you the walls, also to show you how it kind of reflects or points towards red sandstone and white marble inlay, which it is not. It is just Geru lime plaster, Geru coat, and white paint. And a picture of Diwane Aam, where formal gatherings took place. And this is the boundary of the interior palace. By this time, Jai Singh was died, and then we have Pratap Singh, and then we have Ram Singh, who was a photographer. And then you have Madhu Singh. Madhu Singh, in 20th century, early 20th century, of course, he had to engage with the British. And Madhu Singh, it has a very interesting life. And, I've written about his processes of governance, how he kind of dealt with the strong Brahmin's voice and the political need to engage with the British. Because, of course, Jaipur court is an Orthodox Hindu court, and there was a criticism about, the king had to be careful as to what the Brahmins are talking about. And, Kshatriyas and Brahmins had a politically very kind of interesting relationship. And they often tripped each other for power. Of course, if you were entertaining the British, then you were kind of, not true to your caste, and you were entertaining people who drink wine and eat beef, and how horrible, and all that criticism would come his way. So he always used to be 10 steps ahead of that criticism, and he would stall it. And what he did cleverly was that he built a separate building to entertain the British outside of the boundary of the palace. This Mubarak Mahal was built, to entertain the British, and it's a double height, beautiful building, design, supervised by Swinton Jacob, who trained Chiman Lal, who was a draftsman. And by now, the political agents were working with the princely states to build there, and Swinton Jacob was quite a kind of, quite a prolific architect who, by now, also an Indophile. He was very interested in, Indian design, and he also, Madhu Singh also commissioned Jaipur portfolio of architecture, which Swinton Jacob put together in terms of elements of architecture. And that's a beautiful piece, and we have that in the library in Sushant, and it's a set of drawings, and so Mubarak Mahal, by now the idea of exchange of design in the design, using drawings as the design process had already started getting embedded in the building process. And then we come to independence, and in the heart of Jaipur is also Jantar Mantar. Jantar Mantar is Another, this is Rajendra Prasad, of course, but he is in Jantar Mantar, and Jantar Mantar is a, it's a site which has huge, large instruments to check time, and in a way that site, for me is a really an important mark of modernity, because what Jai Singh was trying to do was standardize time. Remember that during his court, there were a lot of, Brahmins, and the daily routine of a king would be governed by, the panchangs, and, the Brahmin will tell you what is a good time to get up, what is a good time to sleep, when should you have a bath, which direction you should go. So it was, and then there were lots of schools of Brahmins and there's lots of panchangs. So, there was always a conflict. So what Jai Singh very cleverly does is he builds these enormous, giant structures through which you can tell the nakshatra, you can tell the rashi, you can tell the time. And he would go and, almost like, scientific evidence. He would say, show me that this is this tithi and this var on. So it was like a pre-modern clock, like you have in many cities, you have a clock tower. The idea of a clock tower is that, everybody around in that city would be governed by the time that is showing in the clock tower. Because if you didn't have the clock tower, and of course you didn't have wristwatches, so you could very easily say, "Mere to abhi 6 nahi baje hain." Even if you think it's 6 o'clock, I feel it is still, whatever, bedtime or whatever. So that was kind of a way of, organizing the society. And as I said before, time and space, to contain time and space is, it's almost structural for the running of any society, any city. And Jaipur City Palace also has these magnificent drawings, and this is Madhu Singh the first, who was always shown seated, and he was a huge man, and he's on a boat riding, and on the right you can see the Chandra Mahal, the 7-storied palace, and in the horizon you can see the Surya temple. And also these magnificent large paintings of, this is Govind Dev and this is Krishna and Radha. So I'm just giving you a quick glimpse of the material culture that is, that represents this courtly excellence. So excellence requires patronage, requires shared knowledge systems, requires a common shared goal of of production that is towards producing excellent stuff. And we must remember that, I say that often, we are a soul country, we are a culture that believes in soul in all our diverse religions. And for us, like Dr. Amok said, we have to see hum kaun hai, we have to see what kind of people, we are. And for a long time, producing excellence in crafts and traditions is about touching the soul, is about the craftsman journey to be closer to the truth. And that's why you see, for example, in Banaras, people, craftsmen are weaving these amazing, textiles in the most, not very nice surroundings, and yet they're able to produce because they're in a different world, and they reach the divine through their craft. And it's almost a meditative process. And production of these crafts is a prayer for the craftsman. It's not a job. It's not a kind of, and when it becomes that, when what you do becomes a prayer, when what you do becomes a way of reaching the truth, then what you produce is just something else out of the world. And it invariably will be excellent. So quickly then, after Jai Singh, we have Pratap Singh, and then we have Ram Singh. Ram Singh was, again, all the rulers in Jaipur, contributed, following the vision of its founder, Jai Singh, in their own way contributed the best that time had to offer. And during Ram Singh, camera was invented, and in the Jaipur court, there was he set up a photo lab. And there was no time lag between the invention of camera in Europe and the photo lab in Jaipur. And this is pre-internet days. This is not before we had the telephone. And you can see, a very fashionable king here with spectacles, specs also, 19th century invention. And this is a painted photograph. And you can see him seated on a chair, with his legs crossed, or, with anklets, and very kind of elegant, fashionably dressed, introspective expression, like his predecessor, Jai Singh, very elegant and royal. And he took a lot of photographs of the Zanana, which in his court. And you can see the same table, which is used as a prop next to the woman. And this is Madhu Singh, who actually crossed the 7 seas and went to England during the coronation ceremony. And during his time, of course, the crafts flourished throughout the history of Jaipur. Crafts have always flourished. Because that was the nature of the city. It was designed to have excellence in crafts, and very, very strategically the rulers created the brand Jaipur, and the brand Jaipur was created by first allowing excellent craftsmen to come and inviting them to come to settle in Jaipur, giving them all the facilities, providing them, tax incentives even. And then once they were settled and their children were going in schools and everybody had kind of social networks, then Jai Singh said, look, now you're going to sell only in Jaipur. Whatever you produce in Jaipur will be sold only in Jaipur. You're not allowed to export. So gradually, so therefore, if you had to buy the best jewelry, the best brassware, you had to go to Jaipur because it wasn't available anywhere else. So Jaipur gradually became, for shoppers, the best place to shop in, and it continues to be that. And you have these examples of, this is Henley's album, and during the British period, there were these fine paintings of crafts, where this was also recorded, documented in order to reproduce and export to England. You also have blue pottery, of course, that was introduced by Ram Singh, maybe earlier, I'm not sure, but this is an example from the city museum, a really magnificent large piece of blue pottery, and painted marble as well. So, this is marble painted in very thin gold foil. So I'm just giving you a glimpse of, the craftsmanship that was there. And then we come to the, the modern period, and Vidyadhar Nagar, of course, inspired by Jaipur. And Jaipur, of course, becomes, an inspiration for many architects during the 80s and 90s, and you've got Doshi, who designed Vidyadhar Nagar, and there are a lot of Jaipur elements, including the pink color, which I don't know if it's anyway. So this is that, and then of course you have Korea's building, Jawahar Kala Kendra, which apart from I showed you how the the square moves to plug the gap between the hills, and Korea uses that here as a conceptual tool, conceptual motif to to give a reference to Jaipur when he moves the 9th square of the mandala out. And among, apart from, the 9 planets he's used references to Alvar Aalto, who was a great inspiration for him. And you can see that, and the central courtyard, which is, which has a reference to Modhera in its seating. And this is my last slide, coming to the 1990s or late 80s. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. I can just remember one quote that talking to or having a conversation with a wise person is worth reading 1,000 books. And definitely you have taken us through immense knowledge about one of the famous Indian urban fabrics. You truly have agglutinated the history, culture, forms, material, spirituality, vastu, and whatnot. Thank you, ma'am. We are really enlightened with your presence today. Thank you so much. I would now request Rachna to please introduce our next speaker, architect Benny Kuriakos.
Thank you, Shubhra. The second speaker for today's session is Dr. Benny Kuriakos. He started his career in 1984 and received the basic lessons in architecture under the tutelage of Laurie Baker. After receiving the Charles Wallace India Trust Award for an MA in Conservation Studies at the University of York, London, he has received his doctorate from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Dr. Benny is known for his work for the design of public buildings and transplantation of buildings in Kerala section of Crafts Village known as Dakshin Chitra in Chennai. Major architectural works includes the Mujris Heritage Project, Institute of Pellet Medicine in Calicut, the design of tsunami-affected villages at Chinnagudi and Tarangambadi in Nagapatnam district, the Springdale Heritage Resort at Vandi Periyar and Ananthaya Resort in Kanyakumari. Dr. Benny has authored the book Conserving Timber Structures in India and one of the editors for the book Guidelines for Preparation of Heritage Management Plan. He has offered his services as consultant to UNDP, UNESCO, various state governments, and many other organizations. Once again, we welcome you, sir, for Quadrants Chapter 3. Over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Rajana. I'm audible, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Rajana, for giving me, I would like to thank Mamta and BMS and COA for giving me an opportunity. So today I'm trying to talk about how sustainability has, it has to be very relevant and in India, especially in the Indian context. That is the argument of what I'm trying to say. I'll just go into my presentation. Just sorry, I just took the wrong presentation. Right, yeah. So I'm just trying to see it from the Indian context what sustainable architecture means. The definition of, it's come into very much into, all over literature, architecture, development discussions. The word sustainability has come, which was not there in the olden days. So it has become very common with the, the most commonly quoted definition of sustainable development is this one from the Brundtland report. which came out in 1987. Sustainable development is development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So this is the most commonly noted definitions. But I would like to give two, this came as part of Our Common Future, the World Commission on Environment and Development, which came out, the report came out in 1987. I'm taking two definitions which are more than 100 years old, which I think is very apt. One is that no blind opposition to development, but opposition to blind development, which was a famous slogan which was raised almost more than 100 years ago. There is another definition which, it's not a definition, which Hind Swaraj, Mahatma Gandhiji, father of the nation, has mentioned in his small booklet or book called The Hind Swaraj, which came out in 1909. The world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So you have to see that he has said it more than 100 years ago. The energy crisis came in the 1970s, and of course, Rachel Carson wrote the book The Silent Spring in the 1960s. But one of the reports which caused a great discussion that there is a limit to growth. Limits to Growth is the title of the report. It was a report for the Club of Rome by some Harvard scholars, and this is the title of the book, Limits to Growth. So at that point, the argument raised was there is our oil reserves are limited, our metal reserves are limited, so we cannot go the way we go now. It has opened eyes, because till then the argument was very, very different. In the 70s, it was the conservation of energy crisis, and the material limits to the materials which are available was the thought. But from 2000 onwards, the thought process changed slightly. The disposal of waste and its consequences became a serious issue. Of course, the nuclear waste disposal was always a debatable issue from the 1970s and 80s, very serious issue, especially with the Chernobyl accident which has come up. But even the solid waste disposal, the pollution, everything became a serious problem. It's became a thought pause. It's become a serious issue that all these wastage of materials, which it's still a major issue which is to be looked at. I'm not going into the history of the word sustainable, how the sustainable development or sustainable architecture, but we have to look at things from a completely different perspective, especially for India. If you look at the kind of things which, if you look at the dialogue which has been happening in the alternate stream of architecture, Hassan Fathy in his 60s, he did his projects in the 40s, but he raised his argument in the late 60s with this book called The Architecture for the Poor. Laurie Baker in India raised a lot of arguments on cost-effective housing or low-cost housing. Conservation came into prominence a bit later. The earth buildings or the mud buildings became a prominent argument, or as an alternative to the so-called concrete buildings. All these things came. But all these things, they were talking the same thing. It is only the name change. But the last 2 decades, we have been talking about sustainable architecture and green architecture and those things. And one of the major effects of this thing coming into India, or one of the things, is the green buildings. And there are various ratings, platinum rating, gold rating, and all those things, which has been put forward by LEED. A LEED rating, which is mostly from US, and India has also, Indian Green Building Council has also borrowed it to quite a large extent. UK has a different system. There are, there's a GREHA rating in India. So with all these changes, I mean, we are trying to put it into ratings, which I think is not right, because it's a very complex, architecture is very complex. It has many dimensions: social, cultural, technical, political, and judging a building whether it is green by just following some guidelines might not be it looks very superficial. At the same time, to borrow from the West, I mean, we have made a mistake, according to me, by borrowing the so-called, in quotes, modern architecture from the international style of architecture from the West. And I mean, it should not be the case when it comes to green architecture or sustainable architecture. We should not be making the same mistake like what we have done earlier. Now, coming to Indian situation, I just don't want to go details into it. The statistics is quoted. I mean, there's a quote, I mean, which is there for the last 30 years. A little bit changes will be here. 6% of the world's population consumes more than 35% of its resources. So this is one of the things which has been quoted in many of the books. So North-South divide, developed countries and underdeveloped countries, this issue is there. If we look at India, India has a large footprint in terms of the population. We are the second largest populated country in the world. But much of India has a very tiny environmental impact per capita compared to the West, and there are examples of green design. Even now, I will say that the kind of buildings which are coming up in our village and the usage of those buildings makes very much less environmental impact when compared with the other countries. Now, this is a slightly older statistics, but it says the per capita carbon dioxide emission in metric tons. For example, UAE, you can see at the bottom, 22.9 metric tons is the carbon emission per capita, where the United States of America, the carbon emission is slightly less, 16.5. At the same time, you can see countries like Ethiopia, 0.1, Bangladesh is 0.5, whereas Australia is 15.4. I think so. The Qatar is 43.9. You see, Qatar produces almost 30 times the carbon dioxide emission that India produces. So there is a huge difference in terms. I mean, the carbon dioxide emission is not uniform throughout the world, and this is it. So India is making, China is 7.5 metric tons. So this figure is there. So if you look at the 700 billion population which we have, as a, 700 crores people that we have in the world, it's a smaller section of the population which is causing the global warming and the climate change, which is happening. There are still, I will say that, I mean, the statistics says that 400 to 500 crores, there are poor people in the world. It is a man-made problem. UNDP reports and many of the reports says that climate change is a man-made problem. That is why we are trying to correct it. But out of the 700 crores of people in the world, only 100 crores are responsible for this change. And this kind of argument, I mean, it's one important thing about climate change is that it's a problem, global warming, sea level rise, and all these issues. It's a problem which is going to affect the Europeans as well as the Indians. It affects almost the entire population. There are some places which might get some benefits out of this. And but when the first environmental conference under the UN happened in 1972 in Stockholm, our Prime Minister Indira Gandhi went to the conference and told that poverty is the biggest pollution. Because at that time, pollution was a major issue. And so it has changed quite a bit. And that is what is, I mean, so we had a bold Prime Minister who said it. What we could see, the European cities were polluted in the 50s and 60s. We found that many of the industries which cause pollution got shifted to the third world countries. I mean, this is something which has happened. and that trend was happening, but then the world got into this sustainable development as a major issue. So first it came as an environmental sustainability, but over a period of time it underwent a lot of changes. I mean, the social people started talking about social sustainability, cultural sustainability, economic sustainability. So it is under the meaning of the word sustainability has undergone changes, and it has many dimensions. So we are now talking not only about the environmental sustainability, we are talking about all these different dimensions of the sustainability. And if you look at the sustainable development goals, which has been launched by the UN, United Nations, most of them cover issues like housing, water supply, drinking water, equity. There are so many issues which are being covered. Now, there are a lot of studies. IPCC come out with reports, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. 3,000 scientists meet once in 2 years. And it will be highly confusing. One thing is very clear. Global warming is continuing. Whatever controls which we wanted to put, or the countries agreed to certain norms, whatever we agreed is not happening in the proper manner. See, everybody met in Kyoto and said the Kyoto Protocol so that the emissions, everything will be controlled. Most of the countries were not able to control the emission part, and they were not able to keep up to the promise. And you had cases where some of the politicians not listening to what is being done, or we had President Trump getting out of the Paris Agreement. And now one of the first things which the new US President Biden did was to sign the Paris Agreement again. So all these things, there's a lot of political implications, but there are a lot of discussions going on in the scientific world. But one thing which is very clear, I'm just talking about the Climate Central Report. One thing which is very clear, there are 200 million people will fall below the high tide line by 2100, which is the substantial figure. There are studies which says 1 meter sea level rise will happen, 2 meter sea level rise will happen if we continue in the present state. So even with moderate reductions in greenhouse, 36 million people in India will lose their houses. They will be completely threatened by the flooding issue or the water. So which means that this figure is much more than the earlier figure which has been projected. And most of the countries, most of the scientists believe that the situation can be worse than what it is projected. And this is a map which is in the Climate Central website. You can see this is the Chennai map. I live in Chennai. You can see there will be a lot of areas which will be below the annual flood level. A lot of areas which are where houses and a lot of settlements are there which will get affected by the flooding or by 2050. This is 2050 level. I mean, these red marks are not areas where there are water bodies or lakes. There are settlements in those areas. Now, looking at again some of this is carbon dioxide levels, the carbon ppm in the atmosphere. In 1869, it was 288. An increase in the 100 years till 1969, it came to 325. There was 37 parts per million has gone up. But in 1996, 359. What happened in 100 years? It just happened in 27 years. And in 2019, after 23 years, there was a 52 ppm. So what happened between 1869 and 1969 is 37 parts per million. But 1996, after the Kyoto Protocol was signed, and 2019, there is 52 parts per million. So things are not happening in spite of all these agreements and protocols. And you have to understand that for the first 12 million years, the carbon dioxide or the carbon ppm never crossed 280 ppm. So these figures matter quite a bit as far as things are concerned. Now, one of the other statistics is that 90% of the urban dwellers have been breathing unsafe air, resulting in 4.2 million deaths. So perhaps more people will die in the world because of they breathe unsafe air than corona as a whole. So this is, I mean, I don't think the corona figure, I think will be less than 4.2 million deaths. So we worry about corona, but we don't worry about unsafe or polluted air in our cities. Some of the Indian cities are highly polluted. So we don't realize that about the importance of these things. Now, how is it related to architecture? Now, this is old statistics, but still it is 25% of the timber, virgin timber, is used in building construction, which is in turn responsible for global warming. 40% of the raw stone, gravel, and sand is used in the worldwide each year. Buildings consume 16% of the water, 40% of the energy used manually, and close to 70% of the sulfur dioxide produced by the fuel consumption, the combustion, are produced through the creation of electricity used to power houses and offices. So architecture, buildings, offices, all these built environment is responsible for close to 75% of the sulfur dioxide emission. Is responsible for 40% of the energy used annually. Vehicles is different. So vehicles also might be a substantial figure. So if we look at that, architecture is responsible for much of the global warming, sea level rise, and climate change which is happening. Now, if we look at the Indian situation, most of the, I mean, it is, of course, sustainable architecture is, I mean, there are master's level courses, it is being taught in the bachelor's level, etc. But there are a lot of things which are being neglected. There is a huge gap between academia and practice. There is a lot of things which is being taught in the academia and never gets implemented in the practice. I mean, I will say that even many of the people who practice sustainable architecture or try to do energy efficient buildings, still they are much, I mean, they could have done much more than this thing. And the third dimension of the sinking of the land and water is not taken into account. And what we have to understand, if you look at the study, if you believe the studies by many of the reports, which says the world is going to look very, very different from now. I thought that most of these problems will be affecting only, when I started getting into this issue, looking into this issue, I just thought that only my grandchildren will be affected. Now I'm quite sure that my children are going to get affected. The world is going to look very different 25 years from now. That is what it says. Now, if we just go into this thing, if you look at the things, we have to understand certain things. Architecture, I'm just trying to point out certain aspects of architecture. Asbestos was considered to be a wonderful building material. It's no longer produced, even by third world countries. The chlorofluorocarbon, which is used for air conditioning, is being phased out, still is being used in some other countries. There is a technology failure in architecture. So many of the materials which is there, there are so many other materials. For example, formaldehyde is used in many of the plywoods that we manufacture, and melamine polish that we use is believed to cause some kind of harmful effects. So there is a kind of, many of the materials we still use it, or what we thought was successful. Later on, scientific research showed that these materials have to be banned or not to be used. So we can try to see there is a lot of failure in terms of the technology. There is a kind of climatic failure. There was an argument which is that now we have a technology of air conditioning or heating the buildings. So we need not follow the climate. We need not build according to the climate. This was an argument. When they took this argument in the 1920s and 30s, it was right to a great extent, because at that time, nobody assumed that energy crisis will come. Nobody thought that the global warming will be there. Nobody thought that the climate change will happen. Nobody thought that the sea level will rise. So all these materials, many of the things, the kind of architecture which gave to the so-called modern architecture or the international style of architecture, it failed in certain areas because of the climate. I mean, it was heat island was formed in many of the areas. The temperature between two multi-storied buildings or the high-rise buildings was much higher. There are a lot of studies done on these things, but we still find many of these buildings coming up. If we look at the social aspects, there are a lot of studies done on. Many of the traditional communities were broken up. There are a lot of studies done on how the social systems have been broken up into this thing. I mean, there are some studies which has been done in Europe, etc., which showed that in apartments, the people who live in apartments, the divorce rates are very high. So there are a lot of studies which are done as part of this, which showed that the social systems have been broken up. And one of the changes which we find, people are moved indoors. And when people move indoors, I mean, you know, when I look at, I used to play quite a bit outside, but when I look at my children, they spend much less time compared with me playing outside. And the next generation, the new generation, I know they'll be spending much less time outdoors. So all these incredible amount of energy is wasted in heating and cooling of buildings. And this is what is happening. There has been a cultural failure. Many of the communities, cultural beliefs of the communities were broken up. Vernacular architecture, which was done according to the local climate and architecture, that was destroyed in many of the places. So what is, I mean, of course, it is coming back in a way. I mean, it has been introduced as at least as an elective in most of the architecture schools now. So there has been a cultural failure also which happened with the kind of thing. See, what I'm trying to talk is not just about sustainability. All these things has to be linked with the kind of architecture which has been occupying or which has, I mean, conquered the typical kind of thing. There is an environmental failure because we have very limited resources available. Sand has become river sand has become a scarce material in many of the places. So people are already looking for alternatives, and we are trying to, I mean, the fly ash, we are looking at many alternate materials. And generation of waste is also a problem because there was a study done in Chennai which shows that 1/3 of the waste generated in Chennai city is linked with construction waste. So so this is also happening. So with all these things, of course, if you can, everything looks fine on paper. The global goals for sustainable development, there are 17 goals, and various aspects are there. But I remember 2-3 things. There was in 1987, it was celebrated as the International Year for the Shelter for Homeless, and the United Nations celebrated it, and saying that by 2000 we will give accommodation we will try to give houses for the poor people or the roofless people. What we have seen in India in 1984, 25 million houses, 25 million families were without houses. Now that figure is standing to more than 50 million families. It has got more than double. And by 2000, we had the Millennium Goals. I mean, much of the Millennium Goals were absorbed into the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals, which has been linked. But one plus point is that it is trying to address these issues in a very holistic manner, including, for example, the 5th goal is gender equality, and the 4th goal is quality education. So you are trying to look at things in a very comprehensive, broad-minded, multidisciplinary way. And mostly architecture is mostly linked with the Sustainable Development Goals, which is 11, sustainable cities and communities. And this is that. Now there is one point I want to make here, one argument which I've been telling in many other places. The world's cities occupy just 3% of the earth lands, but account for 80% of the energy consumption. And it also accounts for 75% of the carbon emissions. So there is a substantial, our cities are playing a major role. And a lot of the studies says that the cities are going to become more and more crowded. Now, most of the population in India lives in rural areas, but they say, the urban population is going. During the corona, I expect a reverse migration to happen because of the corona and various things which is going to happen. The only way out for India is not to allow migration. We have to put in money and resources so that our rural areas are developed. Otherwise, we will never be able to come. If everybody starts migrating to Mumbai and Pune and Chennai and Bangalore and Delhi, our problems, none of these problems will get solved because there is a huge concentration of resources in cities. We have to see all these things in their totality, and that is what is required. There are more than 45 million families without the houses. Now, the question which is coming up when I try to look into the various, of course, there are so many seminars and webinars, especially it is happening after the corona lockdown. But what has the building profession done to solve these issues? Of course, as I said earlier, there is a huge gap between the academia and the practice. Less than 1% of the architectural work which is happening in India, including those done by engineers and architects, is going to be done in a much lesser area. It's the profession is actual building. None of these issues are getting reflected. And I don't think it will get reflected in the next 5 years or 10 years. And especially for students and architects and engineers and everybody, at least at present, climate change, I don't know whether it means anything to many of these people. We have to question what is happening now. It is very, very important. It's not something which will go as a smooth sail because drastic changes are required. It's not the cosmetic changes are not enough. You need to perform surgeries, not medicines. And Hassan Fathy questioned, Laurie Baker questioned the architecture which has happened at then. Corbusier also, what he did, when you look at his writings in the 1920s and early 30s, it is very clear that he was questioning some of these things. And I'm just giving one government initiative because I had an opportunity to see some of the things which the Netherlands government was doing. They appointed a committee in 2007, as soon as one of the meetings which happened on IPCC. And the Delta Committee, it is known as, they gave the recommendations. And I'm just trying to put 3 or 4 things. It is available in the net. Anybody can know. Seawater level rising is larger than expected. This is the conclusion of the Delta Committee. According to the Delta Committee, the seawater level rising will be between 65 to 130. Sorry, that's not meter. It will be centimeters in 2100. So they are expecting an average of 1 meter and to 2 to 4 meters, 2200.
So your slide is still at. Can you slide down? Are you talking on the same slide? I'm sorry to disturb you. Is this the quality of construction?
The title of the slide is Conclusions of Delta Committee. Can you see it?
No.
No. So what I will do, I'll just stop sharing and start sharing once again.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry. Just give me a second. I think there was.
Yes, sir.
Can you see it now?
Yes, sir. Now we can see it.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know.
No, we're sorry, sir. We thought it was, I just realized.
No. So I just, okay. So anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm just starting. I don't want to repeat what I've said.
Right.
So the data committee, there are these 3-4 conclusions which was there. I'm not. It's a very elaborate report. One is the seawater level is rising larger than expected. The other thing is that the rise in seawater level will be 65 to 130 centimeter in 2000. You have to understand this report was written in 2007, 2008. Now the situation has become much more worse than that. And 65 to 130 centimeter in 2100, and 2 to 4 meters will be in 2200, which means, see, when you say that 1 meter rise and 2 meter rise, it's very clear quite a bit of Bombay will be underwater, Kochi will be underwater, Chennai will be underwater situation. And present safety norms are too low. And so they started various programs, and one of the programs, they have built new dikes. And Netherlands, one of the things they are trying to do, about 40% of Netherlands is below the seawater level. They have already got dikes. So if the seawater level rises by 1 meter, Netherlands will be, quite a bit of Netherlands will be underwater. So they built new dikes now, which will take care of almost up to 4 meters of seawater rise. I mean, this they are planning in 2008 for something which is going to happen in 2100. And this is where most of the countries, I mean, US is making some bold steps in trying to find their answers to the global warming issue. But in India, the profession is not addressing this issue at all. It is not enough that we address this issue by 2015. We have to start addressing these issues much earlier, try to plan what are the steps to be required. We have to look at what other countries are doing. And I've not seen any kind of effort in any of the states which is addressing the global warming issue or the seawater level rise. But many of the other countries have progressed much before that. And we normally, when it comes to nature or the environment, we consider exploiting is good. Exploiting women is bad, exploiting children is bad, exploiting labor is bad, but exploiting nature is considered to be our right. There is a kind of, I mean, it's generally there. And we might be thinking that we have conquered nature. I mean, this is a perception. This is the way science is great, technology is great. But one of the things which is happening very clearly, because I've been part of some of the disaster rehabilitation projects, it's very, very clear nature is giving back to us in the form of climate change and global warming. So, and it is going to be more and more severe in the coming years, which has to be understood very clearly. And who is responsible for this? We are responsible for this. Who is to correct it? We have to correct it. And we must enlarge our areas of knowledge, which is very, very important. I mean, this is a new field. I mean, new kind of perspective is required. So we have to, look at things in a different perspective. The overall international perspective will not be good. We have to take the local context into account and develop proper measures as part of it. And there is no sustainable there is no question of doing sustainable architecture and the normal architecture. Everything we do must be sustainable. Must be sustainable to the core. And if we don't, it's a question of survival anymore. And this is where we have to see. We have to see it as our common future, and that is very important. Now, I'm not looking at the LEED rating. I'm just trying to define the way I try to practice sustainable architecture, which I'm trying to give those things. One is that architecture should be reversible. I'll explain these points. The conservation of energy is very important. Conservation of buildings and recycling of materials is very important. We should be designing buildings which are suitable for the climate. We should be designing buildings which are looking at the social and cultural aspects of people, because social and cultural sustainability is very, very important. We should be looking at conservation of technology and crafts, which is there. What I mean by the architecture should be reversible is very simple. If you build a housing with concrete, it is irreversible. But in the olden days, we used to make buildings with lime mortar. When you make a building with lime mortar, the bricks are reusable. If you're making a building with timber roofs, the timber is reusable. So we can try, in one fact, the architecture that we do is reversible. It can be reused again. very easily. Where concrete or any material, even the brick walls where the cement mortar has been used, is a irreversible process. So if you can just, a earth building is reversible, or if you do a building with earth blocks, then it can be reversible. So there are possibilities of doing. Conservation of energy and resources is very important. Aluminium uses extensive as a great amount of embodied energy. Cement has a great amount of embodied energy, but steel has a great amount of embodied energy. But compared with aluminium, steel will have much less. So we have to look at conservation of energy and conservation of the resources. So many of the traditional methods and techniques are very less energy consuming, and that is what is happening. And when I say the conservation of energy and materials, we find even in our construction there are a lot of things which could have been avoided. Avoid waste in building construction. No waste houses. What we require is not low-cost houses. Of course, low-cost houses are required, but I will say no waste houses are more important. If something is not necessary, then don't do it. And I find a lot of buildings where you build a wall and clad it with glass or thing at a very, very expensive cost. You let in all the heat, and then you run an air conditioner, which will be energy efficient, or the green rated or platinum rated building to do it. And I think we have to look at architecture in a different way, the way we try to do buildings. The conservation of buildings is very important. There are a lot of old buildings. It's never figures in our strategy to fight against global warming and conservation. I'll come to this argument later. Not only the materials is to be reused. Architecture should be suitable to the climate. When you expose a multi-storied building morning till evening without any sunshade or overhang, you are increasing the running cost of the building. Architecture should be suitable to the cultural and social aspects of the people. It's very, very important. You can't, when you build it, especially these things become very, very important when you build in rural areas. You have to cater to their social requirements and cultural requirements. Conservation of crafts and technology is very important. There are so many technologies which are there, which are used traditionally, which are very, very low energy intensity kind of things. And this is these are the 5 principles. I'll give you some case studies before I wind up the session. Environmental responsibility is very important. Social responsibility is important. So all these are all pillars of sustainable development. We want a world where we can live comfortably. We want a viable thing. We want an equitable thing. So all these things are very much required. And we have to link the design that we do with sustainability. And when we try to look at sustainability, there are some, I'm not going into the details. I will say that what is sustainable in Kerala will not be sustainable in Assam or Rajasthan. Sustainability depends on the context and the location. And sustainability has undergone so many changes over the years. What was sustainable 20 years ago might not be sustainable now. There are a lot of changes, things which has happened. Our new knowledge has come, which is there. So sustainability undergo changes. For example, stone was natural granite is there in many parts of Kerala. And it was used traditionally as a locally available building material in many of the Kerala buildings. But now we know that quarrying granite is causing environmental damage and landslides and floods and all those things. It's a cyclic change which is happening. So considering those aspects, so I've used a lot of granite in the olden days, thinking that it is sustainable. But now it is, one has to think about it, or one has to limit the use of it. And as I said, social sustainability, economic sustainability are very important. And we don't have to look at the style of architecture as such. What is important is good architecture and bad architecture. What we do. And as I said earlier, architecture should be reversible. And this is a building which I've constructed in Chennai city with interlocking mud blocks or earth blocks. No cement mortar, no mortar is used. So one brick one brick gets locked with the other brick. The way the bricks are made is like that. The whole building, the two-story building, is built with it. So it is reversible. Tomorrow, if this building is to be dismantled, we can recover, we can reuse the earth bricks. And although I say earth bricks, these are bricks which are more stronger than the country burnt bricks which you get. When we tested it, we found the strength to be more than the country burnt bricks which you get in Chennai. So this is that building, and we have used a steel truss roof and some timber roof for the ground floor area. First floor is steel truss roof, and this is the right side. What you see in the forefront is the timber roofs, and this is the interior of the building where the tiles have been used, and you can see a close-up of the interlocking mud blocks. So no plastering has been done in this thing. Now, conservation of technology and crafts is very important, which is what you see here. This is a building which I've done about 20 years ago, which is the Chettinad, and not even a single unit of electricity or firing is used for making these Chettinad tiles, or the Athangudi tiles they call. And this is from an old building which is more than 100 years, which is there. So there are a lot of these technology, the traditional technology, which are very energy efficient. And you can have, I mean, there is no, I mean, you can get this made in any colors by adding an oxide. So there are these traditional crafts and things. I mean, this is a sample which we have tried to do it for a Chettinad plaster, where without any paint coating, you can see your face on this thing. And these are the various stages of Chettinad plaster. This was a technique which has disappeared. So we found some old masons. I mean, they said that for the last 40 years, we have never done it. The last time we did was in 1916. So as part of this, I mean, along with the MRM Cultural Foundation, and my office was involved in getting this technology process back, revive the technology. And this is the Athangudi tiles or the Chettinad tiles. I mean, these were Victorian tiles. I mean, it was used in Europe as well. You can get any pattern, any color, plain colors or design or anything. Only thing is you need to have a dye. Whatever color you want to get, you mix the oxides and get that color. No firing, no electricity, nothing. And if this can be manufactured locally, then the transportation cost can be also be reduced. Red oxide and the black oxide and the green oxide, etc., has disappeared. It's very difficult. Even we are finding it difficult, although we use in some of the buildings. We are finding it difficult to get the kind of people. Then the other thing is the traditional timber roofs. I mean, we are used extensively in our buildings. Because of that, we have been able to give work to some of the craftsmen. What craftsmen need is nothing. They don't need subsidy. They don't need any monetary help. You give them continuous work and respectability. All these craftsmanship will continue forever. So we did this building, which is a sunken building. I mean, building is partly sunken with a major roof, because traditionally you used to call a building, I mean, even there is people use locally that roofless millions. But because the roof was a very expressive element in traditional architecture. So that's why. So when we try to sink the floor, I mean, we used hot air to escape. So the double roof was given. And since the roof is coming low, so for people to enter, we are given these cables. And this is what you see inside. In this particular building, we are used recycled timber, which is one of the things which many of the buildings which I do, we use timber from the buildings which have been demolished. It's very important to use locally available materials if they are sustainable. And for example, this building, this is a resort that we have done. We have used stones which was picked up from, not quarried stones. You can still build in, so you can still have stone buildings if you just pick up the stones from the area. So no quarrying, no blasting, none of those things. So no landslides or any of those things. You can just use, I mean, these things people are used to these. So we designed a resort based on these things. So every building, depending on the circumstance, depending on the context, depending on the requirements, people try to use, what we try to do is to use different kind of materials. So this is stone with a little bit timber, recycled timber is used, and the flooring is again Athangudi tiles, which you can see in this building. And one of the other things, timber is a very sustainable building material. I think it's the most sustainable building material. For example, this building, except for the front portion, the white plastered walls, that lime washed walls that you see, the rest of the building is entirely built in timber. The flooring is timber, the ceiling is in timber, most of the walls are in timber. This comes in a coffee estate. That's why we have used quite a bit of the glass. And you can see the timber roof and timber railings. So we try to make use of the timber. One advantage of the timber, of course, timber is costly, but we don't always use teak. We use recycled timber. We use timber species which normally people don't use for buildings. We have worked out various studies, and we have done our inquiries and research on the timber species, and we are using for that. You can see again the timber walls which has been used. The advantage of the timber being used in buildings, when you use timber in buildings, the timber doesn't undergo decay, which means that carbon dioxide is not emitted. Again, if trees are grown in its place, the trees will convert. Trees is the only thing which can convert carbon dioxide in the atmosphere into oxygen. All other things is only a delaying tactics. But if you grow more trees, I've been just recently seeing a video in Singapore city. They're trying to plant millions of saplings so that they want to grow trees. Because once you have more trees, the trees will absorb carbon dioxide. So we will be able to reverse the climate change. But the studies have shown that you require a huge extensive, all the wastelands in India are planted with trees. And then we might be able to, or all in wastelands in Australia, all wastelands in North America. So if you grow trees, then the trees will be able to convert carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's the only possibility of reversing the climate change. Otherwise, it's only a question of efficiency in trying to do so. When you use timber in buildings, the carbon in the timber is never emitted. But if you use timber as a firewood, carbon dioxide is emitted. If you allow timber to decay, then also the carbon cycle has to take place, the carbon dioxide is emitted. So this is a very, very important aspect. So one of the reasons why we have used extensive use of timber in my buildings is because of the sustainable value of it. This is a restaurant which we are using. The entire first floor, the kitchen is on the ground floor, the entire first floor is timber, except for that masonry portion where the toilets and the kitchen is coming. Because timber is a very sustainable building material. Recycled timber is recycled materials is very, very important, because already the build material, so here the roofing tiles is completely recycled. In this, these tiles nobody uses, but I used it extensively in my projects. This one. And here, for example, in this building, the doors and windows are completely recycled, taken from old buildings, what you can see with the old design. So you try to recycle most of the material. Architecture should be suitable to the climate, which is very important. Sloping roof is very important. The advantage of the sloping roof is that most of the time it is able to guard the walls from direct sunlight. The roof comes very low and protects the. Many of the modern buildings without any sunshades and overhang is exposed to the sun from morning till evening. So this is a resort which we have done. So the overhang of the roof is, I think, is one of the very critical factors in hot climates, and that is what we try to do. Architecture should be suitable for the social and cultural aspects of the people. This is a village which we have done in Gujarat, rehabilitation of a village called Chapredi. This is the photograph which I've taken. So, for them, the door is not in the corner. They need the niches, and they need all these vessels to begin, because this is what the housewife has got as the dowry. So, Malayalam Manorama, which is the famous newspaper, they collected the money from the readers, and we designed the village. And we designed the houses. So, we try to give the door not in the corner. And we try to convert that space into a built-in seat. So they could decorate this house exactly in the same fashion how they used to live in the olden days. And that, because otherwise, if you put the door in the corner, then you would not have been able to get this kind of niches on either side of the door, which was very traditional. What we use, that since the door is not in the corner, we use that extra 250 of space to store the vessels. So this thing is very, very important to do these things. Now, to conclude, I'm just going to talk about conservation. See, when you do conservation of a building, you are doing recycling the whole building, which is very, very, very sustainable. It's the most sustainable thing which can happen now, as far as sustainable architecture is concerned, is to recycle the whole building. We demolish buildings which are 25 years old, which can easily serve another 100 years or 150 years. What we should be doing is to make changes to the 25-year-old building to satisfy the changing social, cultural, and physical requirements. That is what we should do. So this is a building which we have conserved. We added a kitchen and toilets and everything. The entire building is with timber walls. I mean, the courtyard is still there, and you can see the veranda of the house. And this was the before and after pictures of the same building. And something which was like this is looking like this. So we take 50% of our practice is recycling of buildings. And here also, the damage is there, but replace minimum. Don't try to replace everything, and don't try to make, when you repair an old building, when you conserve an old building, don't try to make it look new, which is very important. That's not there. Many of the buildings, when they are conserved and repaired, it looks like new, which should not be the objective. And so we do the minimum repairs. I mean, try to work with the craftsmen and train the craftsmen on these things. And this is an old house which has been converted into a boutique hotel. I mean, we have added toilets to this. And this is a new addition which has been built. Conservation is very positive. You can add new buildings to existing old buildings. And this is the courtyard of that traditional house, which has been, this is another courtyard which is coming. Now, why is conservation very important? Conservation of buildings, because as I said earlier, it is recycling the whole building. And compared with looking at the labor in the city, new construction involves less labor, more materials, whereas conservation involves more labor and less materials. So what we want to do in conservation is to conservation of resources, sustainable architecture, use minimum amount of material, use minimum resources. So when you do conservation of buildings, you are saving these things. And when you reuse an existing building, and instead of demolishing it and replacing it with, it's a good way of conserving energy, and it's a good way of making less impact on the environment. That is why, as a practice, we do more than 50% of projects use it. There are a lot of studies done on this, the sustainable aspects of conservation. One is that, 2 to 3% of housing stock is recycled every year. There will be perpetual employment in building trade. There will not be any lockdown or recession or lack of employment in the construction industry. And conservation projects use 40% less amount of material and uses more labor. This is and there is a reduction of travel. There is a huge carbon dioxide saving, less construction debris, huge infrastructure investment is saved, and greenfield land is preserved. We have to build buildings. We need new buildings, but they have to be built keeping in mind. One has to look at it in an overall perspective, and that is what is required. There are studies done in UK shows that it takes 35 to 50 years for an energy efficient new home to recover the carbon expended in it. So even the most platinum rated building, it makes an impact on the environment. It is not, that is why I said that when you conserve an existing building, convert it into modern uses, that will be much more, triple platinum rated building, or that is what is going to come as part of it. This is a study done by the US Energy Information Agency, says that buildings constructed before 1920 are more energy efficient than those put up between 1920 and 2000. 1920, what they are trying to say, the traditional buildings were more energy efficient and compared with many of the new buildings kind of thing. What we have to see, heritage as an economic asset, which should be capitalized as part of a development plan. Heritage is not a liability, and a historic building is not a liability. It is an asset, which should be, it's a resource. And if we try to see it as a resource and asset, then we will be able to influence we will be making less impact on the environment. So even if you use the most greener technology, still it makes an impact on the environment. The greenest building is one which is already existing because it has made its impact on the environment 25 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 75 years ago. If there is not enough light in an old building, add more windows. If there is not enough flooring is something is very rough or something, just try to make the minimum changes. There are not toilets in an old building, add toilets. We have come to a stage where we can do anything in an old building. There are cases where you see some videos, etc., in WhatsApp, where buildings are moved from one place to the other. And conserving our historic cities is smart growth. And we can have a smart city only then. It's very, very important to concentrate on conserving many of the people who talk about sustainable buildings and sustainable architecture and green architecture doesn't talk about conserving our historic buildings. Why I'm arguing for it is because if you conserve a existing building, that is the most platinum rate, most energy efficient, less impact on the environment than the most sustainable green building. So that's the talk.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you once again for taking us through the journey of sustainable development, right from the definition to the implementation. Very enlightening statements, two statements that you made, that is, architecture should be reversible and consider heritage as an economic asset. I think if we all consider these two statements and take it ahead, I'm sure the hard-hitting statistics that you showed about how globalization and the city's problems can be very much attained to. Thank you once again, sir.